talk to Roman Svitan about the important. Roman, good evening. Mr. Roman, it's a busy Thursday afternoon for news. Before we start, please like this video now. You can change it later. Also, let us know where you're watching from, your cities and countries. We see and read all your comments. You should subscribe to this YouTube channel now. It's the best way for our messages to reach more people. Mr. Romane, let's begin with important news. Reports indicate that DPRK troops have been detected in Kherson. How quickly could they be deployed to the front in Ukraine? 12,000 DPRK troops is a significant number. How prepared are we resource-wise for such a response?
Військових КНДР – це немала цифра. Як ми ресурсно готові до цього виклику?
Well, the training of any personnel, even with some basic training, as in North Korea, takes weeks, sometimes months. A large number of troops, of course, stretches the training over a certain period of time. That is, real North Korean troops, in numbers that are dangerous for us, may not appear in the theater of military operations until next year at the earliest. We're talking about tens of thousands, and that is exactly the number we need to respond to in terms of preparation. For example, against Russian troops numbering about 600,000 on the territory of Ukraine. Naturally, plus or minus 1, 2, 3, 5, or even 10,000 North Koreans will not definitely change the situation. It is important for us simply to highlight this issue in the information flow in order to get our partners to increase their opposition, including to the so-called third party, which has already officially entered into hostilities. It is necessary to increase pressure at different levels of personnel strength. Even if a single North Korean squad appears, they must be destroyed. The more North Korean military personnel are sent back to their homeland, the longer it will take China to consider sending their troops. The whole process is run by Xi Jinping, and without Chinese approval, Kim Jong-un would not send any military, just as he did not send any shells last year. Thus, the entire process is controlled by China. Naturally, the Chinese will monitor the feedback to analyze the mechanisms of this movement. We need to create a reverse effect by sending North Koreans in the opposite direction, without missing a single one. The Directorate General of Intelligence is currently addressing this issue. The first small groups of North Koreans are already in the Kherson area, but it's unlikely they have engaged in combat. They will most likely be based at a permanent deployment point. Next, depending on opposition, they could be put into combat to shell, as the North Korean army has not been shelling. Although there are thousands of them, they have not fought anywhere this millennium, and this problem exists with any army. Even a large army with no combat experience is inferior to any shelled army. So China will introduce North Koreans in small batches, in light mode. Everything will depend on how we organize a meeting with them. Our armed forces in the Kursk region will organize this meeting. If North Koreans move to the combat zone in Ukraine, tracking them among Russian troops will be difficult. While tracing them among 30,000 to 50,000 Russian troops in Kursk is somewhat manageable, it will be much harder among 600,000 Russians. However, if the intelligence service prioritizes this task, they will focus on tracking them directly. Roman, add the information coming from the main intelligence directorate about the presence of the North Korean military in the Kursk region. It is reported, as my colleague Vlad has already stated, that there are close to 12,000 people, 500 officers among them. specifically the three Pyongyang generals. Moscow has appointed Deputy Minister of Defense Yunusbev Kurov to oversee the training and adaptation of DPRK troops, intending to use them in the war against Ukraine for a decade. What does rejuvenation mean in this context? Obviously, we are talking about a battlefield blessing. But are these few weeks enough in this case? North Korean troops were trained at 5 military training grounds in Russia: Baranovsky, Ussurisk, Dangus, Ulanud, and Ekaterinoslавsky. Additionally, there are the 248th, Prince Volkonsky, and 249th, Sergeyevka regiments. They just went in there. I mean, they're going to be going through combat alignment and training right now. That's exactly what we've been talking about, the question of numbers. The confirmed total number of North Koreans, according to some South Korean intelligence groups, is up to 3,000. That is up to 3 battalions. The 5 ranges where they are located probably have a battalion on each. This just brings the total up to 3,000. It is unlikely that anyone will deploy more than 1 battalion at these ranges. With the Russians, combat alignment is usually up to the battalion level, so there are about 3,000 people deployed at these 5 ranges. The total number planned to be involved is just over 10,000, but that will be stretched. There are not 12,000 people in Kursk region right now. They still have a long way to go, but the first units, especially those that came in a month ago, mainly command units, are indeed already coming into Kursk Oblast and will be stationed somewhere. Северокорейцев на Курще, но это растянется на несколько недель, скорее всего, может быть где-то ближе к середине ноября, может в начале ноября, в середине ноября, все будет зависеть от программы переподготовки. Once the intendant units arrive to establish the permanent deployment site, up to 3,000 North Koreans will start arriving in Kurshchina over several weeks, likely completing by mid-November. This process will focus on retraining them in using frontline weapons and adapting to control and communication systems, including learning some basic Russian terms beyond profanity. Zaporizhzhya may be the next target for the Russian army, according to analysts from The Economist citing a high-ranking Ukrainian official whose name was not disclosed. The official also suggested that Russia may have already regained half of the territory occupied by Ukrainian troops in the Kursk region as of September 2024. I ask you to comment briefly here. And turning back to the east, to Zaporizhzhya, do you think that an attack or breakthrough by the enemy in this direction is really possible? Let us also look at the situation in Kherson. There is a stiffening operation being conducted in Kherson, i.e. mobile actions, one of the main tasks of which is to stiffen the troops, not to control the territories. It is important to understand the objectives as they really are. The troops are restraining up to 5,000 Russian troops, which means the task is done. I would also like to see the Russians decide to move another 50,000 from the Eastern Front, and perhaps that will happen. Everything will depend on whether we have enough forces and means to sustain these stiffening operations. As for Kursk region, on the southern and Zaporizhzhya fronts, the Russians are now using all the reserves they have, those combat reserves that can be brought into combat contact in the Pokrovsky direction. At the moment, they have concentrated the maximum number of combat forces practically on 2 points, in the area of Selidovo and Kurakovo. Moreover, Solovyov is the most difficult area. In the Kurakov and Pokrovsky sections, the Russians are primarily focused on Solovyov, deploying all available combat-ready units and reserves to this area. The deployment of Russian troops on the Zaporizhzhya front now resembles preparation for defense rather than offensive. That is, the number of troops deployed in the Zaporizhzhya directions can only perform tasks related to counterattacks, and that only for the purpose of occupying more favorable defensive positions before the autumn-winter period. The Russians have nothing to conduct large-scale offensive actions on the Zaporizhzhya front. They simply do not have enough reserves. If they had, they would have been transferred to Kerchina, or at least to reinforce the Eastern Front. On the Eastern Front, the Russians have curtailed the number of attacks on some positions, which can be seen in the directions of Toretsk, Chasivoyar, Seversk, Belogorovka. That is, they have nothing to conduct an offensive at the moment. Zaporizhzhya is part of Russian plans, including access to the borders of Luhansk, Donetsk, and Kherson. While their constitution acknowledges non-control over these regions, there is a lack of personnel and equipment to support these plans. Roman, the main Directorate of Intelligence, also reported that preparations for provocative rallies in Ukrainian cities are underway. Anonymous Telegram accounts are seeking individuals willing to attend paid rallies aimed at discrediting Ukraine's military and political leadership. The Russian Federation appears to be trying to polarize public opinion and increase pressure across Ukraine. According to GUAR, these paid rallies are intended to be held in Kyiv, Odessa, Dnipro, and other regional centers.
Як зазначає ГУР, відповідні проплачені мітинги хочуть зібрати у Києві, Одесі, Дніпрі та інших обласних центрах.
How should I react to such notifications? What do you think about Russian intelligence agents all over our country? How much do you think this information from the GSD can help to predict the picture you are talking about? How do you react to such notifications?
Про яку йдеться? І як ви реагуєте на такі повідомлення?
The fact is, it's our politicians' fault. They've overplayed their hand, played a little political game. Recently, there was information that Budanov was going to be removed from his post. Naturally, it was thrown in to find out the attitude of society to this issue, to measure the temperature in Ukrainian society. In addition, there were several other thrown-in information, specially made unnecessary in the conditions of combat operations. We have already seen something similar before Zaluzhny's removal from office. This gave the Russian FSB the opportunity to pick up on this issue and turn it against us. Now they have launched a topic about allegedly supporting Budanov against our politicians. Budanov does not need this. They support themselves. If they need support, he will say so himself. If he does not do this, it means that he does not need support in this form. However, the Russian media have picked up this theme and will try to sway the situation through Telegram channels and other communication mechanisms, which for some reason have not been blocked. This aims to create tension in Ukrainian society and negatively frame the head of one of our intelligence units, reflecting a Russian effort to destabilize. The main intelligence directorate and security service will likely identify the instigators. These manipulations are unlikely to be widespread and seem intended for internal Russian consumption. They need to show some kind of instability in our country to create an appearance for the next Solovyovs. Information night. Roman, we must not succumb to any provocations from Russia or its security services, as they continuously create provocations and psychological operations. It's crucial to remain critical of all information, including potential provocations. Politico has published a critical article stating that 7 countries oppose inviting Ukraine to NATO, including Germany, the United States, Slovakia, Belgium, Slovenia, and Spain. Here is a more global question for you. At what stage do you think we are now in the question of joining NATO? And what, in theory, let us fantasize, could become an alternative conditional safe bloc for Ukraine? Perhaps even with the involvement of Arab countries, as the Western press says. One can fantasize a lot about joining NATO. There are some technological possibilities or barriers that cannot be jumped or ignored when joining. Let's say that one of the barriers, and this is fundamental, is the integrity of the borders of the state that is accepted. All this talk that somewhere once Germany was accepted in half, that is, half of Germany was accepted, half of Germany after liberation was accepted. When NATO was admitted, there were 2 Germanys, the FRG and the GDR, 2 states that joined NATO having already gained a certain independence. First the FRG and then the GDR after the fall of the Berlin Wall. This process is based on basic, definite accessions to NATO and basic documents. It is impossible to jump over them. Therefore, all talk that we can join NATO, let's say according to the German version, is groundless and most likely futile. We should not even voice them at the moment, until we liberate our territory, until we reach the 1991 border. We should not hope for accession yet, so as not to be disappointed. Let us not be deceived. Currently, we can only hope. To secure an invitation to NATO, which requires a decision from all member countries regarding future membership. This invitation would allow us to begin negotiations with each of the 32 countries on specific treaties that underpin the military-political bloc. We have already discussed some of these treaties and concluded mutual assistance agreements with almost half of the countries. This process has already begun. Framework agreements are already in place. Therefore, the invitation itself is, by and large, a small problem for our partners. Why? Because it is an invitation, and then we can solve the issues with the treaties. And for us, this is a very big positive bonus, and a moment connected with the information campaign, including against Russia, with the vision of further development of Ukraine, the Ukrainian Armed Forces, the economy and political moments. This is a whole process. It's like from several roads, you can already understand what is going down this road, and you can see the light ahead. The invitation is the kind of light that will help us. This issue can be solved technically by our partners, and the mechanisms that they are currently installing on the way to this solution can also be opened in principle. Understanding what mechanisms are hindering, for example, in Hungary and Slovakia, there is only one mechanism, the pipe that pumps oil from Russia through Ukraine to Hungary and Slovakia. They get the Moscow discounts, so-called. Someone spreads it around in their pockets. Someone shares it with the economy of their country, keeping afloat. So this issue can be solved by blocking this pipe, let's say, by different mechanisms. And this negativity towards us will disappear. They will become in a common formation with the countries. The same picture is related to the states in Germany. Everything is clear for the states now. Biden will be re-elected now. He will leave with his whole team. I think the new president will at least start relations with a clean slate. The United States, the people of America, and Congress have no agreements with Moscow. Biden, Burns, and Sullivan had them. This issue will be resolved as well. And with Scholz, his behavior is similar to that of Merkel. Allegorically speaking, Scholz is the same Merkel, but with plastic surgery. Well, it can be solved with him too. There is already a serious opposition growing there, which is not against inviting Ukraine to NATO. All the issues are being resolved. As for Spain, Slovenia, and Belgium, I think they are more far-fetched, strained. They certainly can't have any contradictions, all the more so because the French vision and the vision of the French leadership, the same UK and some central countries, on the issue of inviting Ukraine is stable. We think that this vision is precisely that. Inviting Ukraine into NATO will win. Roman, regarding an international organization like the United Nations, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called for a just peace in Ukraine while addressing Russian dictator and terrorist Vladimir Putin at the BRICS summit in Kazan. Today, we have all seen, I think, the photo of the day, how the Secretary-General of the United Nations organization bends down in front of Putin and shakes his hand. Then came the video of the day, how after bowing before Putin, Guterres fell into the arms of another dictator, a Belarusian dictator, namely Alexander Lukashenko.
Різних представників різних країн, проте від військового це дещо окремо. Коментує те, що сьогодні сталося.
I want to share a quote from a military figure, as their reactions differ from those of representatives of other countries. The ex-commander of the Azov regiment, now deputy commander of the 3rd Speer, commented on today's events as follows. On the day the UN was created, we witnessed the greatest disgrace to this long, unimportant, to put it mildly, organization. The UN should be dissolved, as the war in Ukraine has exposed the worthlessness of international agreements. The illusions of security have collapsed. To avoid disgrace, the West must urgently change leadership and create new mechanisms. What is your reaction to Mr. Guterres' contacts with dictators Putin and Lukashenko and his remarks at BRICS about a just world? What is Antonio Guterres hoping for? Because there have been statements that Europe seems to be hoping that Guterres will somehow be able to push Putin towards the so-called peace talks. But this is, first of all, naive, and secondly, it's kind of strange. Guterres is not heading a concerned nations organization, but rather a cash laundering organization. Why? Because his actions, his behavior at the verbal level, by the way, you can see it quite well, show his interest in those financial injections into the UN. More precisely, he is practically the manager of donor funds. Russia is such a good donor, which uses the United Nations organization for its own purposes. Moreover, together with China, being in the Security Council, they have the right of veto, and of course they finance Guterres, among other things. Because this organization on cash laundering really should be dissolved long ago, and FADS should deal with it in general. That is, there are serious organizations just on cash, which should have dealt with the UN itself. It should not exist, not even just changed, because there is no sense in it anymore. The League of Nations was changed too. There was a League of Nations, same trouble as it is now. They just changed the name and created the UN. And then they go to Russia for money. So she just shouldn't exist.
Изменили просто название, то есть создали Организацию Объединенных Наций, а потом она переросла в Организацию Озабоченных Наций, потому что кроме как озабоченности они больше ничего не выявляли. А ну тут еще и за наличкой поехали.
Here I absolutely agree with our servicemen, who sometimes say black to black, and rightly so. If it is black, it is black. You should not say white for black. We are, after all, not politicians, but military men, and we are dying. We have hundreds of thousands dead since 2014, and the UN has shown its face with regard to this. Thank you for the informative conversation and your analysis. Write your comments on what is happening in interim Russia. This is really a bow to dictator Putin, despite war crimes and 3 years of war. Roman Svitan, a colonel in the Ukrainian Army Reserve, answered topical questions. Vladyslav Solovyov and Olga Bilan were with you. Write a comment where you are watching us from. Country, city, we see and read everything. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and see you on the air on the 24th.